So how familiar are you with, like, what have you been able to glean from what we do and from my work or from social media or anything?
You're a functional neurologist, is that right?
Yes, I'm functional neurology. I have a degree in clinical rehabilitation neuropsychology and a PhD in developmental cognitive neuroscience, as well as I started my career as a chiropractor with a specialty in rehabilitation and and neurology. And also, I do a lot of functional neurology. I do a lot. I'm a researcher. I published over 200 papers, 8 best-selling books,
Oh my gosh.
2 clinics in New York. I published, especially in the area of like primitive reflexes and human brain development as related to autism. I published, I think, more than anybody in the world. So, yeah.
Okay. Let's dive in then. Yeah. So, okay, I'll do your like proper intro after, but I want to know, who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
Okay. My name is Dr. Robert Melillo. I started out my career in the clinical world over 35 years ago. I started really more because I was an athlete and I was very interested in rehabilitation. But when I started graduate school in chiropractic school, I fell in love with neurology and neuroscience. But I always had a background as an athlete in exercise and in diet and nutrition and vitamins. And so I was always interested in that. And I really was never thrilled with traditional medicine. It just wasn't my thing. So when I decided I want to be a doctor of some kind, chiropractic made sense for me as an athlete. It worked for me. And then from there, I got a subspecialty in neurology and rehabilitation, which were 2 different subspecialties that took about an additional 8 years. And then I started working with really high-level advanced neurology and rehab. And I did that for my first 10 years. And I was already starting to teach clinical neurology on a graduate level, but also I was, really starting to do some brain research. And then one of my kids was labeled with ADHD, or they weren't sure what it was.
Mm.
And for me, it hit me as a shock as a parent, because how did I miss it? I didn't see this. I really didn't know what ADHD, because I didn't work with a lot of kids at the time. And as most parents, I felt like it was my fault in some way because I was working too much and I wasn't there. But I knew because I started working with some other kids, at a level, or at least I was starting to research what ADHD was. I felt like this was kind of a message to me. Later on, my daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia, anxiety, eating disorder, but she's also a brilliant songwriter. My younger son was on the autism spectrum, and he's now a doctor that works for me. So it was something that was very personal for me. And so the first question when somebody said to me, your child has this or that or this, I said to them, well, what's happening in the brain? What is it? What is ADHD? What is autism? What is dyslexia? And nobody had an answer for me. I went out to any doctor, friends of mine that I knew that were top level pediatricians, pediatric neurologists, neuropsychologists, psychiatrists, everybody. And they all said the same thing. We don't know. We have no idea, but there's nothing you can do about it, which I was like, that doesn't really make sense to me. I already knew a lot about neuroanatomy and neuroscience because I was teaching it and I was doing research into it. But I was a rehab person. So I just wanted to know, show me where the problem is and let me see what I can do. Yeah. And they couldn't answer me. And I didn't believe that because I was also already starting to do research. So I said, all right. So I dove into the research and it became my passion and my obsession for the better part of 10 years. And during that way, I started experimenting. As I was learning things, I started experimenting with different treatments in physical modalities and other modalities like light or, sound or music or educational or, cognitive skills, diet, nutrition. And I started getting really incredible results right from the very beginning. Obviously, I started with my son and my kids first. And so objectively, I saw huge differences in them. And so I knew I was onto something, and I knew I really needed to get this out because I had the idea that in all the literature I was reading and researchers, no one was quite seeing what I was seeing because they were researchers, they weren't clinicians. So
And what were you seeing?
I was seeing that there were these, first of all the literature in the early 90s was confirming that there was no pathology. There's no injury in the brain in any of these. So the idea that like autism is a brain injury is completely wrong from a research perspective. There was no clear-cut genetic mutation. And even today, there isn't any clear-cut genetic mutations, actual, damage or deletion of genes in most of it, right? That's a different conversation. There's a subset of autism that is called syndromic, and that's really kids with Down syndrome, Fragile X, tuberous sclerosis, and an actual genetic syndrome that are labeled with autism. That's only 5% of the kids, very different than the typical kid with autism who has no gene mutation. It wasn't a metabolic disease. There were aspects of it that affected the body and that were involved in the gut and the immune system and inflammation, but that wasn't the cause of it in the brain. That wasn't what was happening. All the research in the 90s in the beginning when we had new brain research that was coming out because Bill Clinton coined that the decade of the brain. So now all this new way of imaging the brain in real time that we never had before came available. And when we did, we looked at it and said, wow, there's no damage, there's no lesion, but there is something with connectivity, what's called functional connectivity. We weren't getting, there wasn't communication between networks. And we started to learn about networks. And we were learning more about how the right brain and left brain differ from one another and how they work and communicate. And it became clear to me that there was some level of imbalance going on because right in the beginning, there were researchers saying there's this unevenness of skills in these kids where they're not damaged or they're not affected in everything like many kids with genetic disorders or global brain injury. They have functions that are advanced or even savant level. And then they have other areas that are really low. And no one could really explain that, but they knew that it was somehow disrupting this flow of information. And for me, that resonated with me as a rehab person. It was an imbalance. And so I was like, okay, this makes sense. So I dove into the research. And then after 10 years, I connected with researchers and a research partner. We wrote a book called Neurobehavioral Disorders of Childhood, an evolutionary perspective, where we looked at the whole spectrum and looked at the root cause of it all. And it came down to an issue called functional disconnection. And that is where we built the model and started talking about looking at therapies and how they might impact that. And that kind of really changed the whole trajectory of my career and what I was focusing. And now I started to focus more on working with kids because also in that book, we defined the problem, but it wasn't really clear exactly how it got that way. But it became clear in the next few years that it had something to do with the unique aspect of human brain development, and it was all developmental. And now we know that even adult mental health issues start in childhood. So that's when I also got a PhD in developmental cognitive neuroscience, as well as a degree in neuropsychology, because I wanted to understand human brain development at the core level. And that's where it all starts.
Whoa. What do you think is the one thing about autism that most parents have completely backwards?
That in almost every case, and again, I've seen many kids that were misdiagnosed with autism. So if it's a proper diagnosis, in almost every case, especially in the non-spelling kids, because we do spelling, I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's something that your audience should know because it's unbelievable where these kids may not be able to speak. And again, one of my areas of research is why they can't speak. Nobody's ever answered that question, and why they regress. Nobody's ever answered that. So you know, what these kids are geniuses. Even the kids that seem most intellectually impaired, those kids are actually incredibly brilliant. They're the smartest people on this planet, but it's their left brain that is overactive and it has shut down their right brain. And that is where all the symptoms come from. That's where all the symptoms come from. But, most of these people are told by speech therapists and ABA that your child's not there. They don't know anything. They don't understand anything. And I understand it looks like that. They're stimming, they're ticking, they're not looking at you, but they hear and know everything at beyond levels that you can imagine. Because they don't feel their body. They don't know where their body is. That's where it starts, which is a right brain function. They don't have a map of their body in their brain. They don't see it.
So their right brain is shut down because their left brain is overactive.
Exactly.
And can you just define the left brain and the right brain for us?
Yeah. So the right brain should develop first in the first 3 years. And it should lead to all the earlier development that we see in a kid in 3 years. Primarily, attachment, forming social relationships, learning how to navigate early social relationships, feeling our body, connecting through interoception and then proprioception, and building maps in our brain, becoming self-aware, like it two children recognize themselves in a mirror and they become an individual person, being able to control their body and their movements, and being able to regulate their emotions and feel their emotions, because you can't regulate them if you don't feel them. And almost all emotions are first felt through the right brain, but then eventually things like sadness, fear, shame, embarrassment, guilt, but also empathy and love and attachment. Getting the big picture on things, being able to problem solve and figure out things get concepts. And nonverbal communication, reading all subtle nonverbal cues about language. The left brain comes online after that for the next 3 years. And that's more about an explosion of verbal language. That's when we start forming conscious memories. We don't form memories. The right brain doesn't really form memories, and it doesn't have words. So we don't, none of us really generally remember before the age of 3. It's called childhood amnesia. That's why, because we're in a right brain mode. The left brain comes on, we start forming conscious memory, we start really learning words, and we start collecting data. We start memorizing facts, numbers, letters, categories. We start, learning how to do basic math, and we, fine motor skill now becomes important with writing or now typing. The left brain is more motor driven. The right brain is more sensory. The left brain generates sympathetic nervous system and inflammation. The right brain is more parasympathetic and anti-inflammation and modulating that. The left brain is goal directed. It's more motivated. It's more, by its nature, it's more obsessive. It's more persistent. It likes familiarity, likes doing the same thing. It's not really interested in relationships as much. It's really interested in its own world, its own thoughts, in more of a virtual world where the right brain lives in a world that has to be full of people and is more nature driven.
Which brain is more nature driven?
Right brain.
Interesting. Okay.
Right brain's more spiritual. It's more moral. So that, our sense of conscience and everything really is more of a right brain function. We learn right from wrong because we have embarrassment, shame, and guilt in the right brain. And also rejection sensitivity, because we need to form relationships to survive. The right brain is very sensitive to rejection. So, kids on the autism spectrum, their left brain comes online too early and it shuts out the right. And so we start to see early left brain skills like hyperlexia.
Yeah.
They're super interested in numbers and letters and can read. I had a kid from England that could read at 7 months, right?
Oh my goodness. My son couldn't read, but he was obsessed with letters and numbers and still is, and writes them all over the driveway.
Right. Yeah. So that's all left brain functions. The right brain doesn't care about that at all, right? The left brain's too busy wanting to climb trees and ride bikes and be outside and make friends and That's what the right brain first 3 years is about. The left brain, we see also stimming. It's an overactivity of an area called Brodmann area 6, or the premotor area of the frontal lobe in the left side of the brain, and an area called the basal ganglia. That's overactive, and that produces complex movement and stereotypical movement. So we see, stimming, tics, back and forth, running back and forth, jumping up and down, all of the things like vocal stimming. The right brain inhibits that. So the right brain normally shuts that down from happening. The left brain in the area, the prefrontal area, generates OCD behavior. So an area called dorsolateral prefrontal cortex generates obsessive thoughts. The orbital frontal generates compulsive behavior. So we see things like, some kids show hypersexuality, like rubbing their genitals a lot over and over, or hyperphagia, where they may overeat, but also just obsessive behaviors, anger outbursts, emotional outbursts. The left brain is primarily two emotions: laughing, silly, giddy, or anger. And they cry only because they have frustration, anger, tears. But the right brain is about sadness. We don't usually see in a lot of these kids real sad tears. Fear, so that they may elope. They have no sense of danger, not really, not normal childhood fears like dark or separation or getting lost or monsters. And they don't really have embarrassment, shame, and guilt. They could be stimming and ticking in front of people, doesn't bother them. Or they might have outbursts or tantrums in a crowded space. They're not aware of that at all. They're not aware of that. They don't care about that. At some level, they're aware of it, but they can't control it. So the thing is that when you see any stimming or ticking, this child is not embodied. They're not the owner of their body. Their left brain is generating all of these automatic programs, and they're not in control of it. And again, what they tell us when they can spell is that they don't want to be doing any of it. So what we think they like there's a video they scroll through 1,000 times, they often tell us, I hate that video. I just can't stop myself from doing it. They literally describe this battle raging in their brain between their left and right brain and, their body. And, they also say every time, if you ask them why they can't speak, they'll tell you through typing, because they can't speak it. They can't type it on a computer very well. They can't write it. But if you touch them, so that they can finally understand where their arm is, because they don't know where their body is. Many of them don't even realize they have a body. They tell us that their tongue is numb. They can't feel it. That's why they can't speak.
And why? And that is also because of the right brain is shut down.
The right brain.
Okay.
Yeah. But they have all the words, like early. Like if your son was hyperlexic, guaranteed he was reading at an earlier age. And if he's watching videos in foreign languages, he knows those languages and can actually read them. And they're in another world of brilliance. And the thing is, most people would treat them like they're not there, like they can't hear, like they're deaf, or like they're babies. And that's what you're told by other therapists. But the other therapists have no idea what's happening in the brain. I see parents from all over the world. First question I say, has anybody tried to explain what's going on in your child's brain? Because that's the first question I had. Yeah. And they always say the same thing. No, not at all. And it doesn't matter. I treat neurologist kids and psychiatrist kids and neurosurgeon kids and neuropsych. Same thing. They all say the same thing. No, nobody said that, and I asked them, would you do that to your patients? Would you treat them without letting them know what the problem is? Because how can you know how to actually treat a problem if you don't know what the problem is? How can you say they're never going to speak when you don't really know why they can't speak?
Oh, yeah. That happened to me when I took my son in just under 2. He was diagnosed with severe level 3 autism. I said, what does that mean? They said he may never speak. He may never be independent, all of those things. And I was really angry at the time because how can you say that? I said, how can you say that? He's not even 2 years old. I said, look what he just did there. Look what he just did there. And she said, that's my diagnosis. It's like, right. But there was no explanation of what was going on in his brain either.
They don't know. They don't know. They have no clue. They have no clue.
And it's very clear that he understands everything. You know, he is brilliant, but
He is.
people, because he's not nonverbal, he can string sentences, express his wants and needs. Mommy, let's go for a walk. You know, things
That's
like
great.
that.
He can do that.
Right. And then now he walks around, his special interest is shapes, but he just turned 7. I'm not talking circles and squares. I'm talking like dodecahedron, octagonal prism, like, and he draws them all on the driveway, like these advanced 3D shapes. He's obsessed by them.
Right. We get kids that when we can, some kids that are higher, that are, more capable of controlling their body, they'll draw like, the structure of atoms and molecules and chemicals. But we get kids that when they can type, they start talking about quantum mechanics. They start talking about physics. They start talking about things that you would think there's no way they know it, but they're so brilliant that if they read anything or hear anything, they immediately have a photographic memory. They never forget it. And they're so interested in that, but they can't show you it. Like a parent will say, I'll say this to a parent, and they'll say, I don't know if I believe that, because they don't understand anything I say. I say, how do you know that? And they say, because I ask them to do something like tie your shoe or put this over there, and they don't do it. And I said, okay, I understand. And your assumption is they don't understand what you're saying. Right. I'm telling you, they understand everything. They just can't get their body to do it. They can't literally get their body to do it because their body's not under their control. They can do all this complex movement and it's all automated and scripted. But for them to stop and do what they want and to actually shut that off and to be able to go and do something purposeful, it's almost impossible. And, they want to desperately do that, because after they ask, the first 2 things they always say when I ask them why you can't speak is they say, they'll tell me, I don't feel my body. I can't move my body. I'm not in control of my body. And then they say, please help me speak. Please help me stop stimming. That's that's what they want more than anything. And that's
how do you help them?
Well, by understanding what the problem is. So there's this developmental imbalance. Again, no damage or anything. There's something called primitive reflexes. This is one of my main areas of research. I'm the only one in the world that's done a randomized age-matched controlled double-blind study looking at retained, neonatal, primary, or primitive reflexes in children, adolescents, and adults with autism. And we did brain imaging before and after. We did, neurological exam. We did a whole battery of neuropsych tests as best we could. And we just trained parents how to implement parts of my program at home. And the idea behind it is those reflexes are there. The human brain is unique beyond any other brain. Why? Because, one, we have the largest brain per body size of any primate. Mm-hmm. But because we're the only bipedal primates, we have by far the smallest birth canal. So that ratio of head size to birth canal, no other animal is even close. Chimpanzees a little bit, but still not even close. So almost every other animal on the planet, even mammals, 80 to 100% of their brain is formed in the womb in a controlled setting. A horse comes out with a full adult-sized head and brain. Their body has to catch up, but their brain is already there. So once they're out, there's not a lot that can go off track. Mm-hmm. Humans, we have to keep our brain only about 20% of an adult size to have it actually come out of the birth canal. Mm-hmm. And the way we get it out of the birth canal, because we need to move. Movement is what created brains on this planet. Living things that don't move don't have a brain. Living things that move have a brain. So movement is what initiated the evolution of brains on this planet. Mm-hmm. And from the very beginning, and we've published papers on this, from the first brains, there was a right and left side. From the very beginning, we know that, going back 500 million years ago. And so we know that the child needs to move to initiate brain development in humans. But the problem is our brain is so immature at birth A child doesn't have any control over movement, and it's just random movement. And the part of their brain that would give them control over movement won't be there till at least the first year, and not fully formed to the second year, when they finally get what we call body ownership and they really can control their own movement. And so these reflexes are there pre-birth to get them into the right position to be born, right? So how do they miraculously get upside down and backwards without the cord wrapped around their neck, deep enough down in the birth canal that they induce the birth process, and then literally they help squeeze themselves out of the birth canal, and they literally push themselves out with the mom. Doesn't feel like it to the mom, but they are actually helping in that. And many kids get stuck in the birth canal, and they need forceps and they need vacuum because they're not helping. So if they're not in the right position, if they're breech, if they're sunny side up, if they have the cord wrapped, if they're not deep enough down where the mom needs to be induced, why? That's not the way it should optimally be. And that's because these reflexes aren't showing up. They're not moving already the way they should. And even though their body may be 9 months of age, their brain isn't yet. It's slower. It's developing at a slower rate than it should for that age. And then once they're out, the first milestone is rooting and sucking. If a mom chooses to breastfeed, the baby should latch pretty easily and right away and not have really any difficulty with it, right? I mean, in the Stone Age, there weren't lactation consultants, right? So it should happen pretty easily and pretty naturally. If it doesn't, or if it's painful, it means the child's rooting and sucking reflex, which is the first reflex outside the womb, isn't there when it should be. And that means that their brain is already a little bit delayed. And so because 80% of our brain develops outside the womb, and our brain develops for 35 years. So it's still developing, meaning something can still go off track. And that's why things like schizophrenia doesn't show up until the 20s, or bipolar may not show up until later, or anxiety, depression late. They're all childhood related. And so what we see is that if they're not hitting their milestones, if they're not rolling over when they should, if they don't like being on their belly or hate it, if they're not crawling like they should, or they're dragging one leg, or they're doing it on their butt, all of that are red flags that these reflexes aren't there and their brain has already gone off track a bit. And the more susceptible, the more brilliant the kid is in an area of the brain, the more likely it is to develop this imbalance because they're more vulnerable. So the right brain is developing through that first year, and the reflexes are taking them through those milestones. And right around 12 months, every child should walk a few steps, talk a few words, and point and have really great eye contact and joint attention, waving, smiling. And once they achieve those, they should never lose them. If they don't have those milestones, all of them, those three, then something's gone off track. And what is it? Their reflexes haven't come on, and they haven't gone away, and they haven't gained, what should happen after the first year. These reflexes lead them through that and then go away. And now leads for the brain to go to the next step of a growth spurt, which is the biggest growth spurt in the history of our brain, which is between 1 and 2. Okay. And the right brain, which is taking the lead, should now really go up and hold down the left and develop all these right brain skills that are critical to social and emotional intelligence and feeling our body and emotional regulation and all of that, and inhibiting and controlling things. But if the reflexes don't go away, it has the opposite effect. It pushes things down. And now in kids that are super gifted like yours in the left brain, it pops up. And now it holds the right brain down, or it crashes it. And that's when they stop losing any connection to their body. They may not respond to their name. They may sound like they can't hear. They stop moving. They may have had a lot of words and they lost them all. All of
so
those.
Explain things. Regression. Why does that okay.
Because that left brain comes on, and now, and it can happen anywhere between 1 and 2 generally, even up to 3. And some even beyond that. And what happens is that when that left brain comes on, it crashes the right brain. And that's what regression is.
Okay. And so, but that can happen throughout. So, like my son, he'll make leaps with his language and eye contact and this and that and be able to regulate his emotions somewhat. And then, when every time he gets sick, he regresses. It's wild. The tics come on, the tantrums, he stops talking. It's like,
Right. So what's also happening in the brainstem, where all these reflexes come from, is development of certain really foundational nuclei for our body and our brain, especially the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight. And when we're born, we're in this fight or flight state. That nuclei in the medulla is really active for a reason. And what that does is, we know a baby's heart rate is really fast, like 140. But also their gut is very immature because of that sympathetic nervous system. And it's that way for a reason, because babies don't produce what we call the adaptive immune system yet. They don't really have antibodies. So they need to get those antibodies from mom's breast milk. So we're all born with an open, leaky gut. Leaky gut doesn't just happen out of nowhere. It's there when we're born, and within the first year or so, 6 months.
Can you explain a leaky gut?
Leaky gut is where the gut is open and more porous and allows large proteins to get through. And an adult gut is closed up and mature, and we don't let large proteins through, like gluten and casein, and we only let small amino acids, and it also acts as a protective barrier against infection or toxins or things like that. But when we're open, when we're born, we want it to be open so that the baby can get these large immunoglobulin proteins that are antibodies, through the stomach lining and into their body to give them an immune system. And we don't want at that point to produce acid and enzymes, because that would literally digest those proteins in the baby's gut, would be counterproductive. We don't need a lot of blood flow. We want the blood flow to be to our muscles and to our brain when we're early development. And we don't need any movement because we don't have any solid waste. But as the baby's progressing in that first year, as they are achieving milestones and these reflexes are starting to go away, as they start ingesting food around 6, 7 months, solid food, and as they start producing their own antibodies, now an area in the medulla also called the parasympathetic or the vagal system starts to kick on and inhibit the sympathetic. We see their heart rate starts to go down. We see that they now their gut closes up, and they don't let large proteins through. They start producing acid and enzymes, which now forms the foundation of their of their biome, because now it forms the right pH for the biome that was seeded by the mother's secretions and fluid. And now it provides the right environment for it to grow. And now we start to have good bacteria thrive, bad bacteria, killed off, yeast. We start to ingest solid food. So on that food might come bacteria or fungus or mold or parasites, and that should be killed in the acid in our stomach. The idea that parasites or mold create autism, you really don't understand what you're talking about a brain if you say that. Yes, they may have mold and parasites and fungus, but that's because of the brainstem and the brain not regulating this balance between sympathetic or parasympathetic. We just published a huge paper on this that was just published. I can send it to you, on the neuroimmunology of how the brain is actually the leader of the immune system. And then they should also be able to break down the foods, and now blood flow flushes in, and now they absorb nutrients and vitamins and minerals and amino acids, and now they start pooping, and they shouldn't be constipated. But what we've shown, and many other researchers are shown, in almost all neurobehavioral issues, but especially autism, that parasympathetic nervous system is not coming on. So they're perpetually in this fight or flight. They perpetually have a leaky gut and malabsorption and lack of acid and enzymes, and they're not digesting food. And so now they have what we call dysbiosis, where bad bugs can live in their gut where they shouldn't, and they develop food sensitivities. What we also see is the left brain activates the immune system and makes it overly aggressive. And the right brain is parasympathetic and inhibits that and anti-inflammation. So we see many of these kids have an over-aggressive immune system, and they have, as soon as dairy-based formula is introduced, they develop eczema, or they develop other types of autoimmune reactions or allergies. And that now when they get a vaccine, they produce too many antibodies too easily. And vaccines are designed to trigger antibody production.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're producing too many antibodies, which is also creating inflammation. And now we inject them with something to create more antibodies, and that makes the inflammation, 10 times worse. And that's pouring gasoline on a fire. And that may also contribute in part to the regression because it happens around a similar time. Or when they get sick, they form antibodies that can attack their skin or their brain, and that becomes PANS or PANDAS. What you're describing is a child that might have PANS or PANDAS. But again, that's not the cause of the problem. But you see that when he gets sick and his immune system ramps up and he starts producing even more antibodies, it attacks the brain, and that creates OCD and tics.
Yes.
And stimming behavior and, maybe even, violent behavior.
And how do you treat that?
You treat that, one, by changing the brain, because you can't just treat it just through vitamins and supplements or medications.
So how do you change the brain?
That's a long conversation. But in
one sentence, how can you change the brain?
The brain by stimulating the underactive areas, by getting rid of the reflexes, by promoting growth through using, motor activities and exercises, sensory stimulation specific to one side of the brain, vestibular input, eye movement, light, sound, smells, all of that. You then also will you can target academically different areas of their brain depending on their age that are more right brain, more left brain, or right brain. In this case, it would be right brain. And then we're going to do, other advanced modalities like timing, rhythm, different, and then we use brain stimulation tools like lasers, transcranial units, direct current, alternating current, maybe even magnetic current. And then we use what's called a TENS unit. We use virtual reality and video games that target specific areas of the brain. And we do it in a very developed, goal-directed way where we're hitting certain goals and we're targeting very specific areas where we're activating areas and networks on the right side, but at the same time, we're inhibiting the left. So we're bringing, because there's two things holding the brain back in an immature state. Mm-hmm. And this is what's happening in autism and in most neurobehavioral issues. Their brain is just immature, or there's an imbalance in that immaturity. And they're being held back by these reflexes, and then they're being held back by the opposite side of the brain. So we need to get rid of the reflexes through physical exercises and stimulation.
Okay.
Then we need to stimulate the overactive networks. We need to inhibit the overactive networks so that that area can come up. And then we need to promote integration between those networks. And then we need to also support the body with vitamins and supplements and specific diets and elimination diets and, really advanced neuroimmunology and functional immunology with specific vitamins that target the part of the immune system that's overproducing antibodies. We need to dampen that. We need to pick up the area that has white blood cells that kills infection. And we need to, reduce their inflammation.
Wow. That feels a little overwhelming. Feels like there's a lot. And how is that kind of treatment accessible to most children?
Yes. I mean, we obviously work with kids from all over the world. We work with, thousands of kids. And we train the parents how to do this. And we do it in a very methodical way.
Yeah.
Very user-friendly. And we become part of a team. The parent and us working together. Ideally, we want to see them first so we can do that, but we do have virtual programs. But the way that we've designed the program is the most special when you start a treatment plan of any kind or equipment or anything, there should be a clear goal. Like, what's the goal here? What's the end game? What are we trying to get to? No one's ever given that. They're just trying to modify symptoms. They're never dealing with the root cause because they don't know what it is. I know that better than anyone in the world because I've studied it and I've been a clinician working on this for over 35 years. And I know the results. We objectively maintain these results. We've actually experimentally proven it. So we do it in a way where there's clear goals, basically to get the child or the adult's brain to catch up to where it should be, and one side to catch up with the other. And then we're doing that in a objective, measurable way. And it's dynamic. It changes as the patient changes, and it's measurable on a daily basis. So we're not just throwing out a program that's like, well, let's give you this and let's hope it changes. We're going to create change. We are absolutely going to change the brain in a directed way. And so we work with thousands of parents. They do it at home. It's not overwhelming, but it is the best solution.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on what autistic kids are the therapies that they're being prescribed today? Which ones do you find effective? Are you against any?
Yeah. I just had a parent, 2 teenage boys. He was, really upset because he spent $2.5 million in the last, 10 years, and he's almost out of money. He spent $500,000 on stem cells, complete waste of money.
Oh my gosh.
He spent, $100,000 on hyperbaric and bought a hyperbaric chamber, sits in the garage collecting dust.
Oh my God.
Functional medicine can be really helpful, but it's not actually the root answer. It's important to use it, but it's not going to really deal with the root issue and the cause. OT and PT and speech therapy, they have their place. But quite honestly, I've seen people that have done that over and over and over, done OT, PT, and speech for years, traditional, and they've gotten no benefit from it and until they start working with us. So, I think it really starts with there are very few to any therapists out there that really understand what the problem is.
Yeah.
And they're doing their best and they're trying to help. And, again, ABA may help a little bit, but it's not dealing with the problem. So, that's where the problem lies. And one modality of a time isn't strong enough to really create the change that you need to really make a profound difference, to get your child to be actually speaking fully in a normal or typical way or close to that. It's not going to happen with just those modalities and piecemeal.
And can I ask, I know you have to go soon, but ADHD, what does that brain look like?
Well, ADHD, again, there's 2 different types. There's a left brain and right brain. There's 3 different subtypes. Type 1, which is the inattentive type, is typically more of a left brain delay that's usually more associated really with dyslexia or learning disabilities or processing issues in kids that are really gifted in right brain skills, like musical. Like my daughter's a singer-songwriter in Nashville. I mean, she started writing songs at 9. She was a genius with that, right? Every single songwriter, we have a podcast called The Right Brain, WRIT, geared towards the right brain problems like, dyslexia, anxiety, bipolar, depression. Every singer-songwriter that we've interviewed in Nashville has been dyslexic growing up. And also most of them dyscalculia. That's not a coincidence. Same thing with athletes, same thing with anybody that's really super gifted, right brain, creative type of person in that area of creativity. So that's one type of ADHD. But the real, traditional classic is like autism. That's why this new phrase called odd ADHD.
Yeah.
They're really the same thing, except for ADHD is it's not as severe an imbalance, and they're not quite the level of genius but they are brilliant. But the level of the imbalance between the left and right isn't as severe, but it's really the same thing. And that's type 2, type 3.
Okay. Is autism and ADHD becoming more common, or are we just getting better at recognizing it?
No, my 3rd book was all about, about the causes and how to maybe be able to lower the risk of having a child with a disability. Not blaming anybody or anything like that. But most of the risks are prenatal. They're in the mother and the father, even more in the father than the mother, which most people don't realize. And they impact, brain expression through what we call epigenetics. And again, in people that are the parents are unusually gifted. Usually, they're very bright, and the siblings are extremely bright and talented in some way or another. It's not a coincidence. This child that ends up with autism is the most gifted person in the family, but they don't present that way. And so, when we talk about that, there are different aspects of it, but it's all comes back to these imbalances in the brain, and it all comes back to development, and it's all changeable.
And it's all changeable. That's
Absolutely.
interesting. My ex husband, the father of my children, he's autistic, and he's you could call him a savant. He is a film composer and just taught himself music. Can't read the music, but can play it. If he hears it, he can play it. And I have ADHD and been writing comedy and making millions of people laugh forever. And so it's like, am I surprised that my son is autistic and my daughter is very much, she fits the ADHD. In fact, she's 5 and she's writing songs and super creative and telling stories,
That's not the classic ADHD, which is more like autism. And it sounds like you're really more ADHD type 1.
Yeah.
But that really usually shows up more as dyslexia and learning disabilities. It's not really ADHD. It's not this, it's labeled that, but it's a complete opposite of that.
So that explains why I nearly failed out of high school.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. We're getting somewhere. Okay, I have so many questions for you, but I know you have to go. So are there any treatments you think are overhyped or just don't have the evidence people think they do?
Yeah, I think the whole thing about the methylation and the MTHFR gene and the FRAT receptor is completely overhyped. To me, it's being promoted by people that, again, don't know the brain at all and don't understand what the real issue is. But I had, multiple parents, but just 2 parents this week that came in and asked me that question. Do you think the MTHFR thing is really a big deal, or is it overhyped? And I said, no, it's overhyped for sure. And they said, yeah, I believe so too, because my son, who's autistic, has the best version of it. And my daughter, who's a superstar, has the worst version. So yeah, it's just, to me, then they're not understanding anything about neurology, and they're looking for something. They're looking for a reason, because they're trying to explain it. And detoxification happens really in the gut, mainly through the production of acid and enzymes, and that it's closed up. And then the pancreas. And we know those are the things that are not happening much more than just the methylation pathway. And all of the vitamin and minerals are low in these kids.
If money were no object, what would your ideal day of therapy and support look like for an autistic child?
Exactly what we do.
Exactly what you do.
We have billionaires. We have some of the top celebrities in the world that I can't say their names. They could go anywhere. I have a billionaire flying in on his private jet for 4 weeks because they were at Harvard. They were at Boston General. They flew in people from around the world that were supposed experts. They've gotten no results. And, there is no better program than what we do. It is the best in the world. There's nothing even close. So,
well, how can we find you? How can people find you?
I have over 1.2 million on my Instagram. So it's not anything close to you, but it's, there are a lot of people that know me. My book, Disconnected Kids, has been one of the best-selling books in this space over the past 10 years. We're on our 3rd edition. I have over 200 published papers that anybody can access online for free just by Googling my name and going into Google Scholar if they want to read the papers. And we have 2 centers, one in New York City, right across from Empire State Building, and one on Long Island. Both offices are great. We also have opened offices in Colombia, Medellin, Mexico City, and Sydney, Australia. And we're going to be opening other offices around the world, probably 10 a year for the next, as long as I'm alive.
That's incredible. And what are 3 things that parents can do today? What is something we can do today?
If we're dealing with kids with autism and left brain dominance, do it you best you can to keep them off technology. I know it's hard, but it fuels their left brain. Everything they do, all the stimming, everything they do is to feed the left brain, which constantly drives the right brain down. The right brain wants to be outside. It wants to move his body. It wants to be around other kids and other people. The left brain doesn't. Don't just say, well, they like doing this and I let them do it. The things they like to do are actually going to create the imbalance and make it harder to get rid of it. The other thing is,
but real quick, I'm sorry, I just have one question. My son is obsessed with being outside. If he could live outside, he would. I'm just saying, explain that. Like he's obsessed with nature.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's not most kids with autism. They prefer to be inside, but some do. But it's just probably part of him being able to feel his body. And maybe he's getting some sensory, because many of them know that the only way they can really regulate themselves is by moving. And they do that and trying to get sensory input. So it's probably his way of trying to regulate and kind of dampen his own left brain a little bit so he can have control. There was one kid who literally, said, I didn't know I had a body when I was 4 or 5. And part of the reason, the only time I would feel my body is when I moved. And so why I flapped and rocked and ran was because only during those times could I even feel my body a little.
Wow. Okay, that makes sense. That's why, like, when it starts raining hard, his instinct is to run outside in the rain and just go, yee.
Yeah, actually, that same kid said the only other time I felt my body is when I was under a shower or in the rain.
My God. Okay. So 3 things that parents can do today to help their autistic children. So we've got limit technology.
Right.
So AAC.
Yeah, I mean, they don't usually like a lot of that, and it's really very limiting, and their language is actually very sophisticated. So learning how to use a spelling board. That is number 2. That's a game changer. It's unbelievable where you can now start having real conversations with your child, even if they speak. But if they do a lot of scripting or echolalia or just, speak to needs or facts, you're not seeing their full language, what's in there. And then the other thing is, I think if you're going to do things like an elimination diet, you need to do an antibody test. You can't just doing a gluten and dairy-free diet or Feingold or Nemechek or, any one diet is not going to fit children. They have different antibodies. And I've never seen a child after tens of thousands of blood tests looking for IgG or IgA or M antibodies that have ever had the same food sensitivities to the same level. So they all need individual diets. And I saw a mom recently that had a child on a casein-free diet because. And she was using a substitute of coconut, which typically is the best substitute. We did the blood test on her, and the highest level of antibodies and inflammation was against coconut. How would you know that unless you do a blood test, right? So these are, 3 things that are really important. Also, really look into, there's so much on Instagram now, and especially people copying my work. That, you see an explosion of people, I have no doubt. You see an explosion of people doing primitive reflexes, like copying the way we do it. And there's so many people that are kind of getting scammed by that, because I have doctors and therapists that I've trained that are certified, that have a fellowship. If they haven't been through my course, they may try to mimic what we're doing, but they don't know what they're doing and they're doing it wrong. And they don't understand the concept of this brain asymmetry that needs to go with it. And so, again, and also things like stem cells and hyperbaric, and, there's so many things out there, and we hear one person saying this tool will change it, and it's all about mold and it's all about parasites,
Or really, I keep hearing about leucovorin. I just keep leucovorin. And I'm like, all right.
And that's something that might get a little bit of help because it's a more pure form. And yes, they do have folate deficiencies because you can't absorb or metabolize folate without acid and enzymes. It's not because of the frat Antibody, because the real question is, why do they have frat antibodies? No one should have antibodies against their own receptors or their own brain receptors. If they do, that's the reason why they get PANS and PANDAS. But that's not the cause. And PANS and PANDAS isn't the cause of it either. That is really more of it's a secondary effect. So the idea is really understand the root cause. There's no one modality that the answer. There's no one vitamin or diet that's the answer. Many of them may help and manage symptoms. But if you can't find somebody that can really clearly explain to you what is happening in the brain, and especially if they have something that they think is really great, have they actually done research? All of our research, I've spent, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of my own money to do the research. And, I feel you have an obligation. If you come up with something new, prove it, right?
Yeah.
But today we don't need to prove it. We just need to make a really nice, Instagram video or reel, and people will buy in, and there's crazy people out there. There's like some crazy girl now who's autistic and, claiming that, all of these researchers that have been around for years, that are some of the best researchers in the world, are stealing her research because she knows the answer to what autism is. And she's like 26 years old and a teacher. We have somebody else out there who's autistic who went on AI and now is saying to people that it's all about glutamate. Nobody in the research world looks at things like glutamate or dopamine or GABA alone anymore. Those are old concepts. Heavy metal toxicity is an old concept that nobody who really knows advanced research looks at anymore, right? Unless you are looking for antibodies against heavy metals. So there's so much misinformation out there. And so, my book, I think, is the first book they should read. And I'm not doing this to sell or promote, or I'm looking at this, objectively and trying to give people if you were my daughter, this is the advice I would give you. If you were related to me, I'm telling you, what is the best path for you? There's so many paths you can go. It can take you so many years that you're wasting and spend so much money that can bankrupt you. And most of it is not going to really turn out to be anything.
Wow. Well, when can I come to New York?
Anytime you want. We have 2 offices. We have, pretty open capacity. I mean, we do have waiting lists, but, obviously we can bring people in. But yeah, I'd love to get you up and show you this. And I mean, obviously I'm saying it and I've proven it with research, but the bottom line is, do you see the research? Do you see the results in your own child? And, and that's the acid test. And, I guarantee you will, and you'll understand it fully.
Well, you're incredible.
Thank you.
And thank you for devoting your life to this. It sounds like you're helping thousands of families all over the world.
Yes.
So you're a gift. And thank you for taking the time to speak with me. And I'm going to link for my audience where they can find you and learn more, and link your books too. So just thank you so much for taking the time. And I'm gonna message you. I want to come.
You can either reach out to my assistant, Janet, or she'll reach out to you.
Okay.
And she'll get you scheduled as soon as possible. Okay.
And I just bring them for a few weeks?
2 weeks would be ideal to start, obviously, because it's a training program for you. And we want to make you expert at doing this at home. And the reality is we're not going to do that in a couple of days. We're going to treat him and assess him and get all this data so we can put together this program. But we're training you as if you were we have a library of 10,000 videos that we've created for training purposes, for our centers, other centers, and for parents. And we selectively pick them for you, but you need hands-on training. And then, we can do a lot of this virtually and through those videos.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. I'll see you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.